My little girl cried, "Why do Grandma and Grandpa love me?" After they gave her cousins iPads and $500 cash and gave her a pack of socks. That evening, I froze the joint family account I managed, cutting them all off. But that was just the beginning. They thought I was just a bitter daughter. They forgot I was a forensic accountant. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The scent of pine needles and roasting turkey was thick in the air, but all I felt was a cold, creeping dread. I'd been fighting a nasty flu for a week, and the only reason I'd dragged myself and my 7-year-old daughter, Sophia, to my parents' house for Christmas was for her. Sophia lived for this day, for the magic of the whole family being together. I, on the other hand, knew what was coming. I just hadn't known it would be this bad. "Okay, presents," my father, Arthur, boomed. My brother Julian and his wife, Chloe, settled their 2 kids on the floor, their phones already out to record the haul. Julian's kids, ages 8 and 10, tore through a mountain of gifts, an Xbox, a new laptop, 2 new iPads, then came the envelopes. $500 each, Chloe announced, panning her phone camera over the cash for her social media followers. Sophia sat patiently by the tree, her eyes wide with hope. Finally, my mother, Eleanor, handed her a single, flat envelope and a small, badly wrapped box. Sophia ripped into the box first, her face bright. It was a 3-pack of plain white socks. Her smile faltered, but she held them up. "Thank you, Grandma." "And open the card, dear," Eleanor said, already looking at her phone. Inside the card was a $10 gift certificate to a local bookstore. Sophia's cousins were already unboxing their iPads, squealing with delight. The silence from our corner of the room was deafening. Sophia looked at the socks, then at the iPads, then at me. Her lower lip began to tremble. She walked over and buried her face in my side, her small shoulders shaking. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice cracking, "why don't Grandma and Grandpa love me?" The room didn't just go quiet, it froze. Chloe smirked, Julian looked annoyed at the interruption, and my parents looked guilty. "Oh, for heaven's sake," my mother muttered. "Don't be so dramatic, Sophia. Christmas isn't about presents." I stood up, lifting my daughter into my arms. The fever I'd been fighting was suddenly gone, replaced by an icy calm. I looked at my mother, at her perfectly coiffed hair and expensive pearls, and then at my brother who was already setting up the new Xbox. I didn't say a word. I just grabbed Sophia's coat, put on my own, and walked out the front door. The betrayal was worse than the flu, worse than any fight we'd ever had. It was a public execution of my daughter's worth. The car was silent on the drive home, except for Sophia's quiet sniffles. I held her hand, my thumb rubbing circles on her skin. "You are loved, baby," I whispered, my voice thick. "You are loved so much by me." "But why did they do it, Mommy?" "Because," I said, choosing my words carefully, "sometimes grown-ups make very, very big mistakes." When we got home, I set her up on the sofa with hot chocolate and her favorite movie. The moment she was settled, I went into my home office. The anger was a roaring fire inside me now, burning away the weakness from the flu. I sat at my desk and pulled up the file. The Arthur and Eleanor Price Family Trust. My parents fancied themselves savvy investors, but they couldn't balance a checkbook. 10 years ago, when I passed my CPA exams and specialized in forensic accounting, they'd asked me to just handle their retirement portfolio. I'd reluctantly agreed, putting my name on the account as the managing partner so I could make trades. For a decade, I had spent hundreds of unpaid hours growing their nest egg. I'd turned their modest savings into a formidable fund. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. I ignored it. It buzzed again. "A text, you embarrassed us. Call me." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Embarrass them. I looked back at the portfolio. It was my work, my expertise, that had paid for those iPads, for that $1,000 in cash, for Chloe's influencer-sponsored vacations. And they had used that very money to humiliate my child. A thought, cold and sharp, cut through my anger. I'd seen Julian's name pop up in the transaction logs before. Repayment for loan, my father would say. Family business, my mother would add. I'd always let it go, trusting them. But as I sat there, the firewall on my work laptop logging my secure connection to the bank, a phrase echoed in my mind. They forgot who I am. They saw me as the sensitive daughter, the overprotective mother. They had forgotten that I was the 1W. Ho held all the keys. They had forgotten that I find financial criminals for a living. I opened a new, encrypted spreadsheet and began to run a trace. That night, I didn't just close the joint account. I initiated a full asset freeze pending an audit for suspicious activity. It was 8:00 p.m. on Christmas Day. The bank's fraud department would see it first thing in the morning. My brother, Julian, was the golden child. He'd always been the one with the big ideas and the magnetic personality. I was the quiet, steady one. While I was in college studying for 18-hour days to get my accounting degree, Julian was finding himself, which usually involved a new girlfriend or a failed startup funded by our parents. I was the one who visited our parents every week. I was the one who took our mother to her doctor's appointments and helped our father with his taxes long before I managed the trust. I hosted Thanksgiving. I remembered birthdays. Julian and his wife, Chloe, would sweep in for major holidays, accept my parents' fawning praise, and then vanish. Chloe was a piece of work. A self-proclaimed lifestyle influencer, her entire online presence was a curated fantasy of brunches, outfits, and exotic trips. She treated me with a barely concealed disdain, as if my stable career and my quiet life with Sophia were a personal affront to her glamorous existence. For years, I'd watched my parents enable them. Julian is just under a lot of pressure, my mother would say, after he'd borrowed several $1,000s. His new tech venture is about to take off. This tech venture had been about to take off for 5 years. He had no product, no office, and no employees, but he had a brand new luxury SUV and Chloe had a new designer bag every week. I knew, in my gut, where the money was coming from, but I'd buried the thought. It was easier to pretend I was just managing a simple retirement fund than to admit my parents were complicit in funding a fraud. But the look on Sophia's face had changed everything. The don't rock the boat part of me was gone. My loyalty had been to my parents. Now it was to my daughter. The day after Christmas, the calls started. First, my father, Arthur. Isabella, my card was declined at the hardware store. Must be a bank error, can you fix it? It's not an error, Dad, I said, my voice flat. I've frozen the account. I'm conducting a full audit. The silence on the other end was heavy. A what? Don't be ridiculous, turn it back on. Your mother needs to go shopping. No, I said, I won't, and I highly suggest you and Mom get a lawyer. I hung up. An hour later, Julian called. He didn't bother with pleasantries. What did you do? He yelled. My transfer didn't go through. Chloe has a brand sponsorship in Aspen. We need that money. The money I grew for Mom and Dad's retirement, you mean? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Or the money you've been siphoning from it for years? He sputtered, How dare you? I'll have you thrown off the account. I'll tell Dad to. You'll do nothing, I cut him off. You forgot something, Julian. My name is on that account as the managing partner. Your name is on nothing, and I'm a forensic accountant. Now I have work to do. The shift from victim to strategist was as simple as flipping a switch. The emotional, heartbroken mother was still there, but the professional, methodical accountant was now in control. I sent Sophia to play with a friend for the day, kissed her goodbye, and then returned to my office. I was no longer a family member. I was an auditor, and this family was my client. My clever trap wasn't something I had to set. It was something they had built themselves, and I just had the blueprints. The leverage was my signature on the trust's operating agreement. I had sole authority to manage, trade, and investigate all holdings. My parents had signed it years ago, eager to have me do the work for free. I began the audit. This was my world. I didn't just look at the bank statements, I cross-referenced dates, times, and merchant codes. I pulled property records, credit histories, and business filings. The loans to Julian weren't loans. They were systematic, scheduled transfers. The pattern was obvious. A large transfer from the trust to my parents' checking account, and then, within minutes, an identical transfer from them to Julian. They were a firewall, trying to muddy the water. But I was better than that. I found the payments for Julian's SUV lease. I found the transfers to Chloe's business account, which she used to buy her designer clothes and pay for her vacations. I found the $10,000 seed money for a startup that had no articles of incorporation, no business license, and no tax ID. It was a ghost. The worst part, the Christmas gifts. I traced the purchase of the iPads, the Xbox, and the laptop. They were all bought on my father's credit card, and the day before the bill was due, a miscellaneous withdrawal for the exact amount was taken from the trust. They had used their retirement fund, the money I had painstakingly grown, to buy lavish gifts for their favored son's family while giving my daughter socks. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I worked for 2 days straight, fueled by coffee and a cold, precise rage. I compiled every fake invoice, every hidden transfer, every lie into a single, password-protected PDF. I saved it to a secure drive. By the time I was done, I had an irrefutable case for embezzlement and fraud. The total amount Julian had siphoned, with my parents' active help, was just over $120,000. I printed a single-page executive summary. Then I called my parents and my brother. "Family meeting," I said. "My house, tomorrow at 10, be here, and Julian, you'll want to bring Chloe." They arrived at 10:00 a.m. sharp, not as a family, but as a hostile delegation. Julian stormed in first, his face red and puffy. Chloe trailed behind him, phone in hand as if she might record, a smug, practiced, "I'm so bored" look on her face. My parents, Arthur and Alina, walked in last. They looked nervous, their usual bluster gone. "Isabella, this has gone far enough," my father began, trying to sound authoritative. "You've made your little point. Now unfreeze our money." "Please, sit down," I said, motioning to the sofas in my living room. I had my laptop connected to the large television on the wall. "I'm not here to make a point. I'm here to present my findings." "Findings?" Julian scoffed. "What is this, a courtroom? We're family." "That," I said, clicking the first slide, "is exactly the problem." On the screen, a simple title appeared: Audit of the Price Family Trust, Executive Summary. Chloe rolled her eyes. "Oh my God," she made a PowerPoint. "That's right, Chloe, I did," I said, turning to her. "For instance, I found the payments for your last-minute influencer trip to Aspen. The one you were so worried about, it was paid for by the trust. But it was coded as property tax, which is interesting, since Mom and Dad's house was paid off 15 years ago." Chloe's smirk vanished. I clicked to the next slide. It was a flow chart. It showed the trust account, managed by me. It showed the systematic withdrawals. And it showed 2 recipients: Julian's tech venture and Chloe's lifestyle LLC. "For the last 5 years," I said, my voice calm and clear, "Julian and Chloe have embezzled $120,450 from the family trust. And you," I looked at my parents, "helped them do it." "Embezzled?" my mother shrieked, clutching her pearls. "We loaned him that money, he's our son." "It's not a loan if there's no promissory note, no interest, and no repayment plan, Alina," I said, using her first name. The auditor was speaking now. "It's theft. You actively concealed these transfers from me, the account manager, by labeling them as household expenses and tax payments. That is conspiracy to commit fraud." Julian jumped to his feet. "You're lying, you're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me." "Am I?" I clicked again. The next slide was a detailed ledger. "This is the $10,000 for your startup, Julian, except the startup has no corporate registration. The money was transferred to a personal account in your name and then used to pay for a down payment on your SUV. Here's the VIN." Julian's face went white. "And finally," I said, my voice dropping, "the Christmas gifts." I put up the credit card statement next to the trust withdrawal. You spent $3,400 on gifts for Julian's children, and you paid for it with money I earned for you. And then you gave my daughter socks. My mother finally broke. He needed it. His venture is it's just slow right now. You have a good job, Isabella. You've always been fine. It's not fair to him. Fair? I nearly laughed. You want to talk about fair? You humiliated my 7-year-old child. You made her feel unloved. And you did it using my free labor. I turned off the TV. The findings are done. Now we talk about consequences. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating. Julian, who had been shouting about jealousy just moments before, was now completely silent, staring at the blank TV screen. Chloe was frantically typing on her phone, probably searching for a lawyer. My parents just looked old and defeated. "This is a disaster," my father whispered, rubbing his temples. "Isabella, you'll fix this, just move some money around, we'll pay it back. Right, Julian?" Julian looked up, his eyes wide with panic. "Pay it back? With what? She's ruined me." "I haven't ruined you, Julian," I said, walking over to my desk. "You ruined yourself, I just did the math." "What do you want, Isabella?" Chloe suddenly snapped, her voice sharp. "Money, is that it? You want us to pay you to stay quiet?" "That's called extortion, Chloe," I replied. "And no, what I want is justice for my daughter, but what I'm going to get is restitution for the trust." I picked up a file folder. "I spent 2 days on this audit. I was just scratching the surface. I was only looking at your direct transfers, but then I got curious. I started wondering how you were really funding this lifestyle, so I ran a full background check." I opened the folder and tossed a stack of papers onto the coffee table. "This isn't just family theft, Julian. You have a history." My parents looked confused. What is that?" "These," I said, "are the public records from 3 other startups you ran in 2 different states. All of them dissolved, and all of them have pending lawsuits from investors you defrauded. You haven't just been stealing from mom and dad, you've been stealing from everyone." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "That's not true. Julian, tell her it's not true." Julian just sank lower into the sofa. "You're not a failed entrepreneur, Julian. You're a con artist, and mom, dad, you're his accomplices. You've been funding his entire fraudulent life." I let that hang in the air, the full, devastating truth. My parents weren't just playing favorites, they were enabling a criminal. Their golden child was a complete fabrication, and they had sacrificed my daughter's happiness to protect that lie. My father, a man I'd never seen cry, put his head in his hands. "What have you done, son?" "It doesn't matter what he's done," I said, my voice like steel. "It matters what I do next." The showdown wasn't loud. It wasn't a screaming match. It was an execution, and I was the one holding the axe. I sat down in the armchair opposite them, the picture of calm. "Here are your options," I said. "There are 2. I placed 2 documents on the table. Option A, this is a legally binding repayment and settlement agreement drawn up by my lawyer. Julian, you will sign over the title of your SUV to the trust. You and Chloe will liquidate any and all assets of value, your designer bags, your watches, your electronics, until you have repaid the first $20,000. The remaining $100,450 will be converted into a formal loan from the trust, with a 10% interest rate, collateralized against your house. You will make monthly payments. If you miss one payment, the entire amount becomes due, and the trust forecloses." Chloe let out a strangled sob. "Our house, you'd make us homeless." "You should have thought of that before you bought iPads with stolen money," I said. "Furthermore, my parents will sign this document, which formally and permanently removes me as the manager of the trust. I will transfer the holdings to a third-party wealth manager of their choice. My work is done. We all sign this, and this family audit goes no further. We are done forever." "And option B?" my father asked, his voice shaking. I picked up my phone. "Option B is that I don't call my lawyer. I call the IRS to report 10 years of tax fraud. And then I call the district attorney and hand over my audit, the one that proves wire fraud and felony embezzlement. And I will also call the lawyers for the investors you scammed in your other ventures and send them my findings as a professional courtesy. You will all be investigated. Julian, you will go to prison. And Mom and Dad, you will likely be charged as accessories. Your retirement won't just be gone, it'll be seized. I held my phone up. Choose. Julian looked at my parents, his eyes begging. Mom, Dad, you can't let her do this. My mother looked at me, her face a mask of desperation. Isabella, please, he's your brother. He stopped being my brother when he let my daughter cry, I said. And you stopped being my parents when you defended him. You have 60 seconds to choose, A or B. The silence was a screaming void. Chloe was openly weeping. My father, with a look of utter defeat, picked up the pen. We'll sign, he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. We'll sign option A. My mother collapsed into sobs, but Julian's face was the one I'll never forget. It wasn't remorse. It was the hollow, empty look of a fraud who had finally been caught. He picked up the pen and, with a trembling hand, signed his life away. The fallout was immediate. The documents were signed, notarized, and filed by my lawyer the next day. I initiated the transfer of the trust to a new firm, wiping my hands of my family's finances forever. Julian and Chloe had to sell their house. The liquidation of their assets barely covered the first payment. The bank foreclosed, and I heard through a cousin that they had to move into a small, 2-bedroom apartment. Chloe's influencer career evaporated overnight when she could no longer post about luxury trips and designer hauls. Julian, stripped of his parents' funding, had to get a real job for the first time in his life, working at a call center. My parents were in a different kind of prison. Their retirement fund was decimated. With the $120,000 gone and the new management fees they had to pay, their comfortable life was over. They had to sell their large family home, the home where they'd humiliated my daughter, and move into a small condo. My mother called me once, crying. I don't understand how you could do this to us, she wept. You have it backwards, Mom, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. You did this to yourselves, I just gave you the bill. I hung up and blocked her number. The next weekend, I took Sophia to Disneyland. We called it our make-up Christmas vacation. As we stood watching the fireworks explode over the castle, she turned to me, her face glowing with pure, uncomplicated joy. This is the best day ever, Mommy, she said, hugging me tight. I love you, baby, I whispered, kissing the top of her head. More than anything. We were free. The toxicity that had defined my entire life was finally gone. I had lost a brother and my parents, but I had gained my self-respect, and I had protected my daughter. As I held her, I knew I had finally closed the account in every way that mattered. Justice was served.